Today is September 24th, 2013. My name is Teresa Larson, and I'm sitting at the Ames Historical Society with Gary Mulhall. Thank you for coming down to visit with us, Gary.
I'm glad to be here.
And Gary is a graduate of Ames High School, and this week his class is celebrating their 50th class reunion.
Yes.
Gary, do I have your permission to record your voice and picture today?
You certainly do. You have not coerced me, and I'm here of my own free will, and glad to do it.
Tell me where you were born and when.
Well, I'm a Mary Greeley Hospital alum, June 16th, 1945. And that actually causes some identity crisis for me, because you're really not a boomer unless you were born after January 1 of 46, officially. And I read about that in one of the news magazines. And that was very perplexing, because, and I'm certainly too young to be considered or to consider myself a World War II era greatest generation member. I mean,
but that's what makes your stories interesting, because you're part of
yes,
a very important bridge generation. Why was your family in Ames?
Well, I'll finish my point by saying I now identify myself as a pre-boomer.
You're right.
So I'm a pre-boomer. My dad, wonderful dad, Robert Bob Mulhall, was essentially an Ames native. His folks were from Kentucky, but they had settled up in Story City after World War I in the 20s. Dad was born in 21 and lived on a farm up there. Grandpa and Grandma lost the farm at the start of the Depression, and they moved back to Kentucky with Dad, of course. But then after a few years, we haven't really tracked this, they came back to Ames. And my grandparents somehow came up with the money to buy a pretty good sized house on Sheldon Avenue, and rented rooms to Iowa State students. Dad finished junior high at Welch and then went to Ames High. So Dad was here, graduated from Ames High in '39, first team Des Moines Register all-state football player, and we're all very proud of that. He's in the Ames High Athletic Hall of Fame now. And he and Mom met in the early 40s when they were both in college. Was from Wisconsin, and they were introduced by one of Mom's cousins, who was a roommate of my father's at Loras College in Dubuque at the time. So we can talk,
So
more
what was your
about,
father's profession that brought it back to Ames?
Well, he was, I think, I've not checked with Loras College's registrar's records, but I think he was either an English or a communications major. And he and a high school classmate, he told me, volunteered for the U.S. Navy the morning after Pearl Harbor. He never told me why the Navy. It's tough to imagine a guy from Iowa signing on for the Navy, but he and Doc Cabo, was his friends Cabo Payne, who later became a veterinarian on the Iowa State faculty, they volunteered that morning and soon shipped out for the Great Lakes Naval Training Center in Chicago. And Dad, as they found out, because he didn't know at the time, didn't come up on the induction physical, but when he got to Great Lakes, they found he was deaf in one ear, completely deaf. And that was enough, interestingly, to get him out of military service. So he went back to Loras, finished up, and then came to Ames and still wanted to make a contribution to the war effort. So, interestingly, he wound up working on the Manhattan Project as a laborer, essentially, and also working at WI, I think, on the radio staff part-time. And Dad, they would cook, that's what the term for it, in big kettles, big pressurized kettles, the uranium ore in high temperature in little Quonset huts or wooden barracks type buildings that were over by the journalism building across from the physical plant on the Iowa State campus. Years later, when I was in journalism school there, the ground outside was still radioactive. And Dad would tell me occasionally about how these kettles would go critical and alarm bells would sound. Everybody'd bail out of the buildings. The old white Buffalo fire truck would come over from under the stadium, and a kettle would blow up and blow the side out of the building. Incredible story. But anyway, that Dad came back to help, to work, and I was born in '45, just as the war was winding down, and so that Mom, they were married in '44, I think in Chicago actually, and so there they were, settled in as newlyweds, and I was born a year later, and I guess that answers your question.
It does.
Yeah.
So tell me what your first memory of Ames is. When were you first aware of something happening in Ames and you can place yourself in the city of Ames?
Boy, I really had to noodle that question when you fortunately sent me a list of some questions. And, I think for all of us, our very earliest years are pretty vague. There has to be something pretty, significant to really pop that out. And then, of course, you don't really remember how old you were. I can remember shoveling snow with my mom out behind the Grandpa was a custodian on the Iowa State staff, interestingly for the journalism, or the press building as it was called then, and Shattuck Theater and the old L.A. building, which used to be the ROTC horse stables. And he continued that job until he retired. But at some point, very soon after I was born, when I was born, the folks lived in an apartment on West Street, 1 block west of Sheldon, which put them very close to my grandparents around the corner. Within a couple of years, they bought a home at the corner of Lincoln Way and Riverside, the northeast corner. A big, wonderful home, nothing fancy, but 2-story apartment above, apartment below. At one time, General Rush Lincoln, who was the ROTC commandant at Iowa State in the before World War I, I think. They had cavalry troops that would train on Central Campus. You can imagine 100 horses and cadets riding horses on that campus in the middle. Anyway, Rush Lincoln had owned that home at one time, and I found one of his riding saddles up in the attic.
Do you know what has happened to that saddle? My goodness.
Well, I can tell you because it had been up in that unheated attic for decades, and I picked it up and brought it down the stepladder, and it literally fell apart in my hands. But it had his initials on the leather on the side.
Well, that's a neat memory, even if it's not your first.
Yeah, well, I digress as usual. Your viewers will notice with me, a Gabby Irishman, that I often get sidetracked and Please pardon me. That's all I can say. I can't get over my genetic troubles for loquaciousness. But at any rate, I wanted to set the stage on that home on Lincoln Way in Riverside, because so many of my childhood memories center on that, because my grandparents were right upstairs and we were on the first floor apartment. And talk about great built-in babysitters. And I became very close to my grandparents.
So why were you and your
Obviously.
mom shoveling snow?
Well, Mom was kind of a stay-at-home mom, and she went out and shoveled a little snow behind the house to the garage, detached garage. I don't think she did maintaining that property was kind of tough, which later fell on my shoulders for shoveling and mowing. It's a corner lot, as we all say. Oh, so many memories there. But so I was out once, I remember, with Mom shoveling. One of my early memories was when my folks had another couple over to play bridge, and they had a toddler my age, and they both threw us into the crib together in the bedroom right beside the living room. And this young boy or girl and I weren't anywhere near ready to go to sleep. So we were peeking around the corner at my folks, laughing. A lot of memories beyond those early days of it, kind of infancy. We were in that home for several years before we had moved around the corner, literally, onto South Russell. In our first family home, I can talk about that, but another memory that just hit me was looking out onto Lincoln Way at Christmas time, having to get a chair to get up to look through the window on the door, out through the porch, out on the Lincoln Way, looking for Santa Claus.
Now, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it seemed to me that there were quite a few Catholic families in that area because it was fairly close to St. Cecilia's Church. Do I remember that correctly?
You are absolutely correct.
And tell me about going to St. Cecilia School then.
Well, it was wonderful, really. It was a wonderful educational environment, straight-laced. The Mulhalls and the Svecks, the Herricks, and one or two other families were in head-to-head competition. Literally, no pun intended, to see, I've joked about how many kids they could have. Not quite sure who won. Well, I don't think the Mulhalls won. I'm the oldest of 8. I think it was either the Herricks or the Svecks. But as you say, the neighborhood was really chock full of Catholic families, especially south of Lincoln Way. That was kind of fun. We would walk to St. Cecilia together quite often.
And that's max a 4 or 5 block walk.
Yeah.
6 at the most.
East.
Going east. Mm-hmm.
And there was a little grocery store on Lincoln Way. Along the way, we could stop and get candy, usually after school. You didn't want to take candy to school and have the nuns tell your folks that Gary's been showing up at school with a lot of candy, and so you'd stop there and buy it and then try and get it finished by the time you got home. But just a lot of Catholic families, but certainly a lot of Protestant families, and including a Jewish family, the Mezvinskys. Abe Mezvinsky's nephew lived down the street from us. Whittier School was in the same neighborhood, so it was a nice place for people of all faiths to settle. And of course, great for university folks as well, because it was just a short drive out to campus from that neighborhood. And
So going to St. Cecilia School, do you have memorable teachers? Do you have some thoughts about some of the academics there? You said it was a good experience. It was real solid. We'll talk about academics first, and then we can talk about...
well, academics were challenging, rigorous. I've always kind of prided myself in being a good speller, and I attribute that to the spelling bees we used to have in second grade. Sister Fidelis would, the nuns who taught there were Sisters of Mercy with her mother house in Dubuque. They also are very noted for their hospitals to this day. But at that time, they had many nuns in parochial schools. And we were blessed to have a convent right near the church. And however, even at that time, late 50s, we were seeing a number of lay teachers in the school. But probably the majority of them were nuns. So several of them are very stand out in my mind. Sister Fidelis and her spelling bees, which I often won.
You weren't competitive or anything.
No. I was actually not. I was noted more for my hijinks and just being a total goof-off than academics. However, I totally shocked and surprised everybody, including my parents, by being the valedictorian of the 8th grade class.
Well done.
Yes, it's my only academic achievement.
I want to know about your hijinks, though. Let's talk about those.
Oh, threw a girl's beret out the window one time on a nice spring day while class was going on. That was not a good move.
Got in a little trouble for that?
Got in a little trouble for that. Nothing real serious.
I understand.
It was a special time. The church was right nearby. A blend of a good, solid academics and religious experiences.
Well, so let's talk about some of the fun. First of all, from the child's perspective, either from religious festivals or things that happened in that neighborhood that you just remember as a good community fun.
Each spring, St. Cecilia had a fair, as most schools do, to raise money. You know, when our girls got older, Edwards had one, and we volunteered. And I think I was behind the sheet with the fish, the fish deal. But St. Cecilia had one, and one of their fun events was musical chairs. And these were in the evening, usually on like a Thursday night. So I won at musical chairs and got a cake. So that was cool.
To think at that time, a cake was a great prize.
Yeah.
Now kids want it.
Well, with
with
5 or 6 kids in the family too. I mean, that was something special when the folks drove me home with a cake in my lap. Had coconut frosting on it, as I recall.
So festivals, there was this spring.
Festivals, First Communion, and all that went with that. Big deal. We didn't go to Mass daily. But on certain feast days we would have a Mass. The priest would come over to the school and teach catechism, and it was, of course, a small school, so you really got close to the classmates. Much like in ninth grade and then on into high school, the academic competition was tough because even in grade school there at St. Cecilia, a majority of the students were children of faculty and staff at Iowa State. So there was a lot of brain power flying. That's why I think it's especially significant that I was the valedictorian of the. It's kind of like winning the Olympics, you know, when you're just a kid. Oh, the academic Olympics.
Well, what about playgrounds? And obviously, you said it was a great neighborhood of different kinds of persuasions, religions, whatnot. Did you kids go? What did you do on the weekends with your friends?
Well, I'll talk about that in the same. It's interesting. I would go back to St. Cecilia and say that, like so many kids in the younger years, in the grade school years, the recesses were special. You know, and we'd shoot marbles, yo-yos. And the marbles, of course, a good weather activity, but I remember having a marble bag with like 200 marbles in it, and some are big ones, you know. I'm not quite sure what we did with those. Cat's eyes were beautiful. Some great marble competition, but mostly it was kind of to see how many marbles you could get and how beautiful they were. Another one was yo-yos. It hit me this morning when I was thinking about our interview. Yo-yos were popular by the time I got into third or fourth grade. And one of the yo-yo companies sent a professional what would that be, a yo-yoer? A professional yo-yoer around to schools throughout the country. And I'm imagining they had 15 of these guys, but traveling the country, but it was fascinating to see what these guys could do with a yo-yo. And so after that, you had to go right downtown to the hobby shop, you know, and get their yo-yo. One of the great memories at St. Cecilia was the day that my classmate Tony Wheeler had his mom come to school with her trained horse, a beautiful Palomino.
My goodness.
And the nuns got all of us from all 8 grades out onto the playground while Mrs. Wheeler gave us a half an hour, 45 minutes of her horse, standing on his back legs and kneeling down and lying down, and oh, that was great. And she rode him around, and so Tony was really a hit after that. You know, we all got to see his horse. I was out on the playground one day, and we were playing catch with a football, and I went out for a pass, and I went right into a classmate, a girl who was swinging, and just caught it right here in my forehead, just above on my eyebrow, with full force. And the seat of the swing was not today's rubber, you know, types. It was a wooden plank. Just kind of knocked me out for a second. I was soon off to McFarland Clinic to get stitched up, and you know, off duty the rest of the day.
Well, you probably had a concussion.
I may have, yeah.
But they didn't screen for that at that time.
No. It's a wonder I went on to be the valedictorian. So, but playgrounds. That south of Lincoln Way neighborhood was so much fun because of O'Neill Park, which named for the dairy, the family had O'Neill Dairy, and apparently had given the land. It was over by the Highway Commission, and a nice baseball diamond, some playground equipment. We had a lot of great baseball games over there.
Now, just for a more contemporary audience, young people. We're talking in 2013. But when you were going to O'Neill Park, you were on basically just on the north side of Lincoln Way. So your mom and dad just let you cross Lincoln Way.
South side.
You were just south side.
Yeah.
So, but you could roam the neighborhood. You just.
Oh, yeah.
Your mom probably said at 8 o'clock in the morning, have fun, and maybe you'd see her at lunch or supper. I mean, this is different for contemporary young people to picture.
And we see this on the internet to this day, where boomers and pre-boomers like myself are passing on these photos, slideshows, narratives about what our childhoods were like compared to today, where there basically was no fear of child molesters and being kidnapped and
Or firearms.
Firearms. It was completely different. Many left their homes unlocked. I have this kind of wandering nature, always had it, and from the time I got my first bike, which my grandpa had put together for me from some other bikes, I was gone. That also might have had something to do with overcrowding in our home.
8 children? I'd like to have some space. I get it.
By the time that, we moved around the corner onto South Russell, first home, 113 South Russell, it was getting pretty full. But you're absolutely right. I would take off at 8 in the morning and sometimes not come home until dinner time.
And you had some friends to do this with.
Oh, the whole neighborhood was packed. We roamed from the Highway Commission up to Brookside Park, Devil's Trail at Brookside Park.
We'll talk about that.
Yeah. Normally not much farther in those grade school years, but that's a lot of distance. And we'd play hide and seek on our bikes. There were a lot of alleyways in that neighborhood. Once a bunch of us were throwing rocks at swallows at a swallow house. And this is a little vulgar, but to be honest, I reared back to throw the rock, and I had my mouth open, and one
eliminated in your mouth.
Eliminated right in my mouth. I was about 2 blocks from home, and I ran all the way home without breathing or certainly swallowing. I didn't know what to do. I was totally panicked. I was probably 7, 8 years old. I went racing through the living room, and my mother says, "Gary, what's wrong? What's wrong?" And I went to the kitchen sink. I should have gone to the toilet, but anyway, I spit it out. She said, "Ugh, what's that?" And I said, "A bird went in my mouth." And she said, "Well, how could that happen?" And I said, "Well, we were throwing rocks at the swallow's house in the alley." And she said, "Well, that serves you right."
A mother's justice.
Mother's justice. I like the... And she probably told my dad that night. But anyway, behind the Highway Commission, they had huge piles of steel cable rolled up, 15, 20 feet high, and these were for guardrails and other purposes. And what a great thing to play in when you're a kid. You could go in there and we'd play hide and seek, crawl up these things, get down in.
Were you ever chased out?
No, we weren't. And in behind the Highway Commission along Squaw Creek, the hobos, the rail line came, the Fort Dodge Des Moines line came through there towards Des Moines. And the hobos lived under the bridges. And we go down there and talk to those guys. And now, of course, today, that you never know. But that's how safe we felt.
Yeah. So thank you for that picture. That helps characterize what it was like to be a kid at, say, 1955,
55
basically, or so.
10 years old.
10 years old, and
Yeah.
really kind of roaming the
Not just the immediate neighborhood, but far out. We'd go over to Squaw Creek and build forts. Once we tried to build a big raft, like Tom Sawyer.
The Tom Sawyer Huck
Finn,
yeah.
And we got it out into the middle of the creek, and it sank. Nobody drowned because there was only 2 feet of water.
Now then, because you were from St. Cecilia School, you probably didn't experience that town and gown feeling. But I understand that there was kind of a little bit of a sense of rivalry between the Central junior high kids and the Welch junior high kids. Can you speak to that at all? I didn't ask you about that beforehand, so if you don't want to speak to it, you don't have to. But
well, I will. I would like to finish my story about my childhood wandering.
Finish that first, please.
Because it's affected me to this day with a nickname.
Okay.
My father nicknamed all of us,
Okay.
and I've taken that up in my own family. Irish genetics again, I guess. But within a short while after I would disappear all day long and come home, he started calling me Red Rover. So to this day, even on into college and adulthood, he called me Red Rover.
Well,
but
the childhood game Red Rover sinned.
Yes.
They would ask for me to run over because I was a little pipsqueak and I couldn't break the line.
Well, Dad just picked up off of that with and also my bike was red.
Oh, so that's why you were a Red Rover.
I was
Gotcha.
Red Rover, and so I still sign off on emails to family and friends Red Rover occasionally, among other nicknames.
Well, I didn't mean to interrupt your story,
and maybe we could come back to this. Those wanderings by bicycle were more, good weather times. Although I remember even in the winter riding my bike if the roads weren't too bad. But then going up to Brookside Park later and skating, they'd flood the tennis courts.
Did you ever skate out on Lake Laverne?
Oh yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
You probably had to walk there.
Dad would take us out.
Okay.
And for Dad, that was like home because he grew up out there on Sheldon, went to Welch, and he skated in his youth a lot. He was a good skater. He had hockey skates. And once I remember, Dad took several of us out there on a beautiful Sunday. Lake Laverne was just packed with people. Dad had on a long wool top coat and a leather hat. Really looked pretty dorky, that had ear flaps that came down, and he was smoking a pipe.
What a picture.
And I'm over kind of on the east side towards the Union, and I'm looking out on the lake, and here comes my father, and he's just skating along with these big hockey skates, and he hits a chunk of ice, and he loses it, and his feet go up, and he came down so hard, I think he knocked the wind out of him. And when he landed, the pipe was still sticking out of his mouth. So I have this silhouette of my dad on the lake with the pipe sticking up.
Well, you don't want to lose your pipe.
Well, yeah.
Well, he probably clenched his teeth as he went down.
I'm sure he did. And several of us kids, we went over to say, Dad, are you okay? Okay. And I think he was gasping for breath. But anyway, he was okay. It was the first time I ever remember my dad, kind of falling down or having an accident.
Yeah.
So,
well, we have a couple threads we can pick up on.
Yeah.
More about wandering.
Brookside, going up to Brookside Park and skating was absolutely fantastic. They had the Parks Department had a big 50-gallon oil drum there that they would start a fire in on Saturday mornings, and we would keep that going. They had a shed there. Do you remember any of that?
I certainly do remember that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I never skated up the creek, though. I know some people would skate up the creek.
Well, that was the other thing I wanted to say. That was the great adventure. You'd skate up above and see how many of your buddies were around. Then you'd sit around the fire and warm up, and you'd try and organize a group of 4 or 5 or 6 to go down on the creek. And I remember walking down those limestone staircase in the skates.
I can hardly picture.
I hated walking on skates, but we'd get down on the creek, and it was wonderful to skate on Squaw Creek.
How far up did you go?
We'd go
Maybe to 13th Street?
I usually went up to about 13th, but some kids went on up to the golf course, and some kids would skate up to Gilbert. They would say now that Gilbert and Squaw Creek are quite a ways apart, but so what they were saying is they would skate up to about where Gilbert was.
On a
That
parallel
far,
line.
yeah.
That's a long way to skate.
That's a long way. They were gone a long time. And, you know, it was remarkable to skate along, and you'd find some open spots where there wasn't much snow, where you could skate really well. You could look down and see golf balls under the ice and minnows.
I was waiting for you to say that somebody broke through, but apparently that never happened.
Oh, no, it did happen. Yeah, you almost always broke through. And usually you'd go up to your knee, you know, or so. And that was not good, because you'd be wet until you got back up and dried up by the barrel again. But there was a big, what we called the swinging bridge, is still there today, I suppose. I
But
think
it's reinforced
and
and
more stable.
Yeah,
now.
it's more
a
stable.
su- But as so many who may watch this and not be too bored may remember there was a bridge that really you could get to swinging, literally. It was suspended on cables.
It was almost like a wave action.
Yeah. And just south of that, between the bridge and 6th Street, there was usually a pretty large area that people would bring shovels down and clear off, and you could really do some skating there, which was kind of nice because the ice up on the tennis courts was usually pretty crowded.
Yeah.
The other thing quickly about Brookside that carries so many memories was on into high school, when a bunch of buddies and I would have hockey games down there at night. Often on school nights we'd have to get our homework done. But I remember this, we had moved up to Curtis by then, and it was, you know, a pretty good walk down to the park from up there on Curtis, better part of a mile, I suppose. But walking down there with my figure skates, not hockey skates, over my shoulder, and we had some tremendous pickup hockey games. I really wasn't a very good skater, but playing hockey you can really develop some skills.
Yeah.
And
It's a good way to work off energy at night.
Yeah, the Kettleson boys, John Timmons, Hatch, Clay Ogg, Jerry Nelson, several of whom, you know, are classmates. In the lights, you have to put a quarter to run the lights. So, but you got a long time, like you got an hour of light for a quarter. So it was.
You know, what really strikes me as something that you're saying is that so much of the fun that young people had, either as pre-boomers or even, you know, some of the boomers,
Yeah,
it was self-directed. Kids found it rather than being overly structured. I mean,
Yeah.
It was. I heard you say like pickup games, and you went and found some buddies, and you did something. It was not like a parent drove you to a sports field or something.
Later on, I guess I was in Little League for a while.
Mm-hmm.
That's the only structured thing I remember. Oh, Boy Scouting.
Boy Scouting.
That was kind of fun.
Yeah.
But no, you're absolutely right. 80% of our weekend during the school year and summer activities were we were on
Self-directed. I mean, you're kind of on your own.
We just get a gang of kids in the neighborhood and do crazy things. Like one of our occasional pastimes was to ride our bikes under tree limbs grabbed the tree limb and let our bikes go, and we had competition by seeing how far our bikes could go. A guy came by while we were doing that and stopped his car and said, "You guys, you shouldn't be doing that."
Well, you know what? The village was raising you there too. There were
Well,
eyes
that's
in
true.
the village.
There were eyes in the village. Another thing I'd be remiss if I didn't bring up, this is structured, but the Ames Parks and Recreation Department had
Summer activities.
Summer activities at the schools for the neighborhood kids.
Mm-hmm.
And Whittier was great.
There would be some arts and crafts. I think they were even traveling like theater groups or puppet groups.
There
lots
was
of
so
different
much.
things.
Yeah. I was just thinking recently about making lanyards. You'd have those plastic, some kids may still do it today. The older I get, I sometimes kind of feel like reverting back to my childhood. I was thinking out back at my home in Olympia, Washington, where I live now, the other night on the deck. And I got, I'm really busy with a lot of activities, but I thought, I had a Google.
Make a lanyard.
Make a lanyard or .com. That was so fantastic.
That plastic stuff that kind of looked like a woven box. Then you had your key or your whistle that was at the very bottom of it.
Yeah. Stuff you could hang on your bike.
Yeah.
We'd put crepe paper in our bike spokes. We'd have, as a part of that
Parks and Rec
thing, there would be like a parade, I think maybe downtown, and all the kids from all the schools would come and and we'd decorate our bikes. We'd put playing cards with clothespins, hook them on our bikes so that it would make a sound like a motorcycle, It was really goofy.
Okay.
But I remember playing a game like hockey in a big box, a 5 or 6 foot long, 3 foot wide box.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea was to get a golf ball into the opponent's goal. And the sticks were pipes that were bent and kind of not real sharp like a hockey stick, but we just banged those things together and just had some fierce competition to try and get that golf ball in. It's just and carpool. Don't get me started on that.
One story about
That was-
Carpool, and then we'll move on to something else. I bet you rode your bike there.
We'd moved.
You're probably on Red Rover even.
Moved up to Curtis, 1505 Curtis, up at the top of the hill, when the summer after 8th grade graduation from St. Cecilia. And although I would have gone to carpool in my grade school years, I'm sure a number of times, I especially remember getting on the bike and going over to carpool every weekend in the summer. And by then I was into 9th grade, and I'd met, puberty was coming on strong. I'd met a lot of wonderful ladies, young girls, when we went on to Central. And so we all hung out at the pool, as I'm sure you did, and the bleachers, playing on the tops, all sorts of crazy stuff that they never have today because of the liability issues. Climbing up the 16-foot tower, which was like
a top of a mountain.
Yeah, top of a mountain, going up halfway and then back down while your buddies are yelling, "Chicken, chicken." Finally getting up there, convinced that you are going to do it this time, you're not going to back out, and jumping off and hitting that water and thinking, I'm not sure I want to do that again. There were stairways, a staircase, short staircase, 3 or 4 steps that came down in front of the bathhouse into the pool, and you could swim under those steps. And I remember, I was probably in grade school, looking underneath there. I'd duck my head down and look under in the water, thinking, if if you get trapped down there, you could drown and nobody would find your body till about 5 o'clock in the afternoon. And that was
funny.
I think it was 2 or 3 years later before I got up enough nerve to swim under those stairs.
I remember the fountains.
The fountain, on a hot day especially, lying on the first tier of the fountain, and just lie under there and in the shade, and all that water's cascading around you. I remember taking swimming lessons there, Red Cross swimming lessons. It was just a wonderful place to go, and just a total melting pot for kids.
It was a blending.
Yeah.
I had asked you kind of about Welch and Central, but
Yeah.
that was a great blending place for
it
Ames.
was. Public pool. A lot of the Welch kids, not a lot, but a number of them were members of the country club. So they went to the country club pool, and you didn't see them much down at Carr Pool, but you would definitely see Welch kids in ninth grade, and you felt kind of like your territory had been invaded, because you never saw them any other time, right? I mean, you alluded earlier to the competition between Central and Welch. It was fierce in football and all sorts of ways.
Yeah.
And so.
Well, I didn't want to leave any comment about Carr's Pool, but I was going to move on to something else. But
Yeah, I think that covers Carr Pool.
Okay.
I was pleased just recently to take our grandsons on a visit here to Ames. Our girls wanted to have a blast from the past trip since they spent their early years here before we moved to Washington. But so pleased to go to the new Furman Aquatic Center and with the grandsons.
it's a beautiful
It
place.
was. And
Yeah.
of course, sitting there, I couldn't help but reflect on the days at Carr Pool and how this had all changed, and all of the big bucket, the automated bucket, and the river, the cascading river. And
Good
I
times.
thought how special it is. This is wonderful. I wouldn't want it any other way. But then I thought about Carr Pool and the fact that it was just one big tank of water, and so everybody was in there together. It was a true melting pot, and so that was the difference between then and now as to how things are approached.
So I always like to ask questions about childhood at Ames. If there was anything scary that happened to the children, was there anything that struck fear? Because I think it helps establish what kind of time it was. What were people afraid of, or what kinds of things could happen that. I think we have a light that's going out here.
Yeah.
Let me see here. I would kind of change my lighting a little bit there. Okay. Come back on, light.
Maybe that's a good thing.
Okay, I'll re-ask my question so I can edit that out. What might be something that, as a child in Ames, were you ever frightened, or was there anything scary that ever happened to you?
Well, first of all, we were blessed that I don't recall any tragic incident that may have happened, like a kidnapping or other.
Or some kind of huge fire that claimed the lives of...
Yeah, or peeping, anyway.
Anyway, crimes against persons, there were not...
Crimes against persons, I don't recall that there was ever anything that, prompted my parents to not let us go out or whatever. I have a story to tell that is going to be perceived by some as totally unbelievable. So I'll try to make it short. I have a propensity to drag these things out. This particular one is very difficult to shorten too much because we haven't talked about VEISHEA. That was another wonderful childhood memory. And at St. Cecilia, and perhaps the public schools as well, on the Friday of VEISHEA weekend, we got out. So I go get permission from my parents. I'm maybe 7th grade at this point, maybe 6th. I take the bike and I go out to campus. And there were always things to do. cherry pies at the home ec department, roaming around the campus, going to the union. On this particular afternoon, I found myself over at the horse barns. I would just always love the horse barns, and still do. In fact, on this trip, I think I'm going to go out and just smell the horse barns. That was the big thing, was just the odor, you know, that kind of horsey odor. I'm not really into horses that much, but so I'm at the horse barns. It's Friday afternoon. It's about 2 o'clock, maybe 3, and there's a young fellow there about my age, and we strike up a conversation. And it turns out he's in town with his dad and his grandpa from their farm or ranch up in northern Iowa, and the name is Winckelmann, and they raise Shetland ponies. And they were known throughout the nation, I think, for their Shetland ponies. And I'm going to drive up there perhaps on this trip and just see if the Winckelmann operation is still there. So he tells me that he and his family are in town for the Chariot Races at the Armory. Now, I was familiar with those because once or twice in my youth I had been to the Chariot Races, and there really wasn't enough room in the Armory to have big horses. Well, it was amazing what they did in there. They put in dirt and had full-scale rodeos in the Armory. And one of the highlights of the rodeos was that the Winckelmanns had 2 chariots, and they'd hitch up 6 or 8 ponies to each one, and they would literally have chariot race around the rodeo arena. And so I was familiar with it, and he said my grandpa is going to pull with our ponies a VEISHEA float tomorrow morning. And he said Grandpa's going to take a chariot and go over with the ponies to the fraternity house to make final arrangements with the guys. And he said, I've talked to Grandpa, would you like to go? Now, what kid, you know.
What an invitation.
What an invitation. 10, 11 years old. In Iowa? Would you like to go on a chariot ride? Of course. So I get on. Here's Grandpa. At least 6 ponies, maybe 8. The kid's on the other side. I'm to the right. We go over to the fraternity house. It's near the Fidel house. I don't remember which one. Across Knapp from the Fidel house at that time. On Welch and Knapp. We pull up in the driveway. Everybody is looking at us like crazy, you can imagine. I think we came right up through campus, through Welch.
There you go, clip, clop, clip, clop.
Oh, golly, what a sight. I mean,
in a chariot.
In a chariot. So we're there only 15 or 20 minutes. Grandpa says, time to go. We get back on. We go now to go back to the barns. We don't go the same route. We go down Knapp to Ash, take a left on Ash, take a right on Sunset. We go down east on Sunset to Beach. We take a left on Beach and head towards Lincoln Way. And as we're crossing Lincoln Way, there's a traffic light there. As we're crossing Lincoln Ways, somebody nearby honked a horn. And those ponies shied and took off in a dead breakaway.
Sprint.
No, sprint.
Yeah, just
north on Beach Avenue, full out. And we got about 100 yards north of the intersection, and Grandpa dropped the reins. Yeah, he drops the reins. And by now we're going like 30 miles an hour.
What are you hanging on to?
Well,
the rails?
For dear life, the top of the chariot. And at that time, there were some nice buildings that had been constructed that were, I think, child development buildings at Iowa State. The Hickson Lead Student Success Center is there now. but that gives everybody a point of reference. Across from the Maple Willow Larch dorm complex, built later. The buildings had been finished, and there was a physical plant landscape crew of 6 or 8 guys working out in front of those buildings. And now it's about 4:30. We're lucky they're still on duty. This was a Friday. They looked down beach and saw what was going on, and they came running out into the street and grabbed the harnesses on those ponies and got us stopped.
Oh my goodness.
Before we went any farther. And I was so terrified, I jumped off before we came to a complete stop and sprained my ankle. So things settled down. I'm sitting on the curb on the west side of beach and kind of nursing my ankle, reflecting on how lucky I was to still be alive. And also, I'm sure thinking my parents aren't going to believe this when I go home and tell them what I did today. When the young man comes up to me and says, "Okay, get back on, we're going to the horse barns." And I said, "No, that's okay." As bad as my ankle was, I walked back to the barns. I had to go back there because my bike was back there, see?
Oh my goodness, what a story.
And yeah, unbelievable. And to this day, I don't know what I told my parents. I mean, I'm sure I wanted to share with them what happened because this was so extraordinary. But on the other hand, my dad was 6'4", 250. I thought I could be grounded, if not paddled, for being so stupid as to get on a chair. On a what? You got on a chariot?
Oh my
So
goodness.
isn't that quite a story?
Well, it is.
I'll never forget it. And,
Well, when I asked you if there was something scary, I didn't quite expect that. But
like a scene from Ben-Hur.
yeah, that's right. Oh my goodness.
I'm very committed to going up there. I may Google Winckelmann's pony farm first to see if they're in operation.
Yeah,
Because
great.
up there, hopefully I will find the fellow about my age who may still be running the pony operation.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and you'd think that Grandpa, who had the reins, would have some sense of I mean, there's liability and there's all kinds of other stuff that's going on here too. My gosh. Oh my gosh.
Well, again, even from the adult perspective back there, I mean, Grandpa,
he just says, if you want to try it,
he's
take
not
one.
worried about my folks suing him for taking. Now today, there's no way that they would do that.
They would do that kind of thing. Oh my gosh.
So I hate to take up so much time on the interview with that story, but
it's a great story.
It is remarkable, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Well, I was going to try to get our conversation into high school, at least for just a little bit here. So
that is, after all, the big. This is the 50th
your big reunion.
Reunion time, yeah.
When you started high school, tell me about the buildings that you were in. I happen to know some inside information here, but you tell me, there was not exactly just one high school. What was happening in that time period?
Well, I guess it would have been about the time we were sophomores. Ames School District started to construct the new high school up north of 20th Street.
Mm-hmm.
And this, prompted by the fact that so many boomer kids were coming along, caused some real logistical problems for the administration as to how to handle this. And as soon as some finished space became available
In the 20th Street building.
At the 20th Street building, they started utilizing that space. I'm thinking in terms of chemistry and biology labs, those newer facilities. So they would bus us up. Half of us would go to the old high school downtown, and then get on buses at noon and go up to the new high school for the afternoon, and vice versa. We'd switch. And in planning this reunion, I've been on the planning committee for about 3 years now, from 1,500 miles away, which has been a little bit of a challenge. But at one of the meetings that I attended here in Ames of the planning committee, one of my classmates said, you know, we really weren't a very close class. And that kind of struck me, and I said, well, why? And he said, well, I remember at our graduation, which was spring of '63, down at the old stadium, outdoor graduation ceremony.
That'd be south of Lincoln Way.
South of Lincoln Way, where
Correct.
Hy-Vee is now,
Right.
with a grocery store, and then Target was in there
Mhm.
earlier. He said, I remember a graduation as we classmates went across the stage, looking up and thinking, I don't know half those people. And he said, I think it's because of the fact that we weren't all together until the senior year.
Mm-hmm.
That's one of the key points here. It was in '62, '63, when we were seniors, that we were all at the new school together.
When one thinks about high school, there are really some classic ways to look at high school. Of course, one is academics, one is extracurricular activities, and the other organized by school, and then there's just, you know, what you did on your free time. So let's take the academics first. You know, here you are, the high school, or you're the St. Cecilia valedictorian, and you and you get to high school. Talk to me about the academics at Ames High at that time.
Well, great question. First of all, and I'm sure even to this day, perhaps, the St. Cecilia graduates are concerned. We certainly were, about how we were going to compete academically when we went to ninth grade, how we were going to fit in socially, to the point of high anxiety as those days narrowed down to when we started. It was interesting. The transition was...
We'll take a break. We have changed our camera angle for just a second because we had an interruption, technical problems.
What they say on TV? Technical difficulties.
So, again, Gary, we were talking about St. Cecilia's kids going to high school, and we were talking about academics. And tell me a little bit about what you thought about the academic rigor at Ames High.
Well, it was a continuation of the academic rigor that we experienced in ninth grade when we came out of St. Cecilia. Could we compete academically? Would we fit in socially? I think those fears were, in both fronts, were pretty much dismissed within a few weeks of school. We found that the nuns and the lay teachers had given us an excellent grounding in the basics to compete very well, and we did. Although I certainly was nowhere near the valedictorian of the Ames High class of '63, but the academic environment in Ames High has been exceptional throughout its history because of, I think, the influences of the genetic influence of the children of faculty and staff members who are well educated and have high expectations for their children. And probably 2/3 of our class fit that category.
And the
we had
school board hired teachers that they expected to challenge that
Exactly.
that genetic pool.
Exactly. And just as today, there's every class has got several national merit scholars or finalists. And there were just some real curve busters. any test that was graded on the curve, you better have, a 90 or higher, or you weren't gonna get an A. And,
Memorable teachers.
Memorable teachers. I remember one of my early English teachers was Mary Reno, and I don't know if Mary taught at the 9th grade level at Central or in the high school in the sophomore year, but she was exceptional in breaking apart sentences and teaching grammar. Later, Mary McNally was a wonderful English literature teacher.
She really helped you look at the big picture, didn't she?
Yeah.
Really look for themes and understanding.
Yeah, and my wife is a classmate, Rhea Barron, and we were in Mary McNally's class together, and we had to write towards the end of the semester a paper, a book report, and I chose Alan Paton's Cry the Beloved Country, and that really gave me an appreciation for apartheid. And I think it's a book that we had maybe touched on briefly during the class. Anyway, I chose it. And Paton doesn't have a lot of books, and the book wasn't particularly long, but very famous book. And my wife Rhea chose some long work, very complex, and I got an A or an A plus from Mary McNally, and she got a B. To this day, she says, you chose something that was, not that difficult. I stepped up and, well, anyway, but Mary McNally was wonderful. Herb Adams, the president, or the principal, was a wonderful guy. And Everett Ritland, vice principal. Cecil Spatcher was our chemistry, or biology teacher. Our chemistry teacher. Floyd Sturdivant. Spatcher and Sturdivant, both wonderful guys. Just made science
Come alive. And it was meaningful.
Be as easy as it could be for any. It's never going to be easy, but these guys were great teachers. We had a history teacher named Donald Cole. This may have been my junior year, because it doesn't matter. It may have been when we were still being bused back and forth, but Donald Cole was not at the school very long, and he was a kind of a mysterious sort. Always pretty even keel, didn't laugh or smile much, very serious demeanor, kind of deep brown eyes, big eyebrows. He was a martial arts fanatic.
Who knew martial arts then?
Yeah. And made classes very interesting. He always liked this macabre, these mysterious aspects of history he would bring into the class. And me being a total goof off, I was walking from my prior class out the back side of the new high school. Down the sidewalk along the back, there was some construction debris beside the sidewalk. Real nice afternoon. There was a 2x2 laying on the ground, and I picked it up and took it into class. How stupid. It was about 3 feet long, maybe 4 feet long. So, and at the new school, we had these new plastic top desks, chair and desktop, all built into one. So, Donald Cole gets into his lecture for the day, and I placed the 2x2 between my desk and the one beside me. And when he taught, he liked to wander around the classroom. He comes up the aisle towards me, and I still had this thing there, and I'm sure I probably went to remove it, and I would like to think I had enough respect for the teacher. I mean, I shouldn't have even brought it into the school, but I'm sure I probably went to grab it, and he said, "No, leave it." And with that, with hardly changing his expression at all, he rears back, kind of gets this glazed look on his eyes, and he does a karate chop on this 2x2.
Oh
and
my gosh.
The table, the desktop's flexed, and it didn't break. It bounced clear up into the air, came crashing down on the floor. And honestly, and I'm sitting there in terror, thinking, uh-oh, this is not good. And he's like 2 feet in front of me. And I remember, without shrieking in pain, no change of expression on his face, he looked down at me and he said, "I think I broke my hand."
Oh my. Oh my.
"Oh," he says, "I think I broke my hand." And of course the whole class is just in shock. He went on and taught the class, and the next day he shows up in a cast. He had broken his hand.
Oh my gosh.
So that's one of those memorable experiences from high school. And
was there any repercussion for you?
no. One would think I maybe had to go down and see Mr. Ritland or Mr. Adams about why One thing is, I imagine that Donald Cole didn't want to bring this up with his direct reports, right?
Now that's something that didn't make it into the spirit.
Yeah.
Anything else that didn't make it into the spirit you'd like to tell me?
Oh, yeah. Oh, we don't have enough time on this interview for that.
Well, we were talking about memorable teachers, and that was a memorable Donald Cole.
Yeah,
wow.
Yeah, and
so should we move on to extracurricular activities in high school?
yeah, that'd be fine.
Okay, you were in sports.
I lettered in football my senior year, but I was later. My younger brothers were outstanding athletes at Ames High in football and track, baseball. My dad, All-State, Des Moines Register first team, 1938, and here I am, just a total dud in athletics, but managed to get a letter in my senior year. Over the years, I told girlfriends and other friends and stuff who were, knew that I had this great athletic background in my family, and I would say that I was, those guys were built for speed, I was built for pleasure. And
were sports an important part, though, of Ames High? For the whole student body, generally speaking?
Oh, I would say so.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, and I was on the football team sophomore, junior, and senior year. In our senior year, first of all, I would back. This is historically significant. Kenneth Wells was my dad's first football coach. Ken, or Kenny as he was called by those who knew him well, became head football coach at Ames High in the fall of '38, which was my dad's senior year. And Ken Wells took over from Ray Donalds, who went on, I think, to the Iowa State coaching staff. So Kenny Wells, my dad's on his first team, and 4 years later or whatever, I'm on his team my senior year, fall of '62. We had a very mediocre season, won a few games, and lost to Boone. This was devastating. You just don't lose to Boone. I'm not sure an Ames High team had ever lost to Boone. We lost to Boone.
That's tough.
And Ken Wells resigned and became, I think, athletic director.
Do you think it was because of the loss?
I'm sure it didn't help. Never did talk to him about that.
Be interesting to know.
And in intramurals that next spring, it was actually a PE class, and we had touch football games in PE, and I was a quarterback, and I was really kind of coming into my own athletically at that point, but I was just 3 years too late. And Ken Wells said, "Mulhall, I wish I had you one more season."
Well, that's forward thinking.
Yeah,
That's
I appreciated his compliment. But
tell me a little bit about the conference that Ames was in at that time.
Central Iowa Conference, Boone, Newton, Oskaloosa, Marshalltown, great rivalry in basketball in particular with Marshalltown. A tough conference, similar schools, short travel distances. Those
Were there fun times traveling to those places?
Yeah, always fun to stop at a restaurant after a game or whatever, and we'd get some, maybe before, get some food. Nothing like some of the stories my dad used to tell, though, about the late '30s and going to these same schools and some of the rivalries. He told me once that going over to Marshalltown, the kids would stand beside the street and throw rocks at the Ames bus. And
Hard to imagine.
Yeah. But a couple of athletic memories. One was I think in my sophomore year, Wheaties and Wilson Sporting Goods teamed up and did a training film, and it was filmed in the old gym, the old high school gym, and everybody from the school, they packed into the stands, and this was a training film for officials. And Gene West, Dave Agard, Bill Dracy, I think his name was, several other, Steve Sosby perhaps, no, not Steve. A couple from my class, which were sophomores, were in this.
So in other words, they were. I'm guessing they were playing basketball in the gym, and then there were referees, and so this was showing what the referees should do in certain situations.
Yeah, and I think it was a select group of our players. Well, I guess as I'm recalling it now, they put some of our basketball players in black jerseys, black uniforms, and some in white. And the whole team probably got new
sneakers or something
new uniforms as a result of all this. I'm sure there were a number of perks that came along, but as a result of this, but so that pretty much involved the whole team, and so that was fun.
That'd be fun to track down that film.
Well, we have a clip of it that we're going to show in a PowerPoint presentation Saturday night at our reunion.
What fun.
Yeah, we've managed to. Bill Ripp, bless his heart, is get from the another favorite teacher. Mm-hmm. I never taught Latin. That was way over my head. But anyway, Bill has been so helpful to us, and we really appreciate it. And he managed to get that as a DVD that somebody has now in digital format. So that was one memorable experience. In that same time frame, a class a year or two ahead of me had tremendous basketball team. Gene, what's Gene's last name? Having a senior moment.
We'll think of it.
Went on and played at Drake.
Okay.
Dave Agard, Dave Childs, Jim Klingsize, passed on now, good friend of mine from St. Cecilia days. Had an almost undefeated season, as I recall, and got into the state championship tournament at Veterans Auditorium.
Mm-hmm.
And we thought we were invincible. No way would we be defeated. And we all loaded onto buses on Wednesday afternoon and went down for the first game of the playoff. And we got demolished by a small farm rural school from southern Iowa. Forget the name. It's all in these spirits, a matter of record.
Mm-hmm.
But
That's crushing.
we were absolutely stunned.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely stunned.
So,
Yeah.
in terms of what did high school kids do to have fun outside of high school hours? You talked about what your grade school kids did. What outside of school hours? What'd you do?
Well, one of the customs that carried on into perhaps the 70s, I don't think they do it now, is dragging Main Street on Saturday night or Friday night, And then,
Did you have a car?
yes,
You left Red Rover behind.
I left Red Rover behind, and in high school I got to use the family's Volkswagen quite a bit of the time. It was not considered my car, but also we had a 55 Mercury station wagon, and I would get to use it occasionally for dates and things, but most of the time I drove the Volkswagen, and it had a sliding vinyl top on it, and it was just a fun car to drive. But the heater was practically non-existent, and so in the winter you just almost froze to death. Just from getting from Curtis over to the new high school, you could be frozen to death driving that car. But it was good in the snow.
Yeah, that's right. 'Cause
So
wait in the back.
I don't know. We just
Where did kids go for dates?
In the summer out to the drive-in. Movies, of course. We didn't have concerts then like they have now at Hilton Coliseum or down in Des Moines.
What about restaurants or places where kids would like to hang out? Where were the places that kids would hang out to go have a Diet Coke, or probably not Diet Coke then, just a soda?
Well, after school, Charco's was a popular place down on South Duff. For pizza, at the east end, towards the east end of Main Street, was George's, which was very popular. In fact, recently at one of our class reunion planning meetings, just last March when I was back in Ames, Steve, the owner of George's, came walking through the Cafe DM with his wife, and it was like I was in a time warp. I recognized him immediately, and now he's probably mid-80s, and I didn't talk to him, but it was great pizza, kind of greasy, and they cut it up. He would cut it up into little pieces, not these big wedges that they do today. So he'd have to slice back and forth, a dozen times.
Cheesy.
Cheesy, greasy sausage. So George's, the college kids had from Welch had their places in Campus Town that there was a place out there called the Pizza Hut.
I think it was called Pizza House, wasn't it? On
Pizza
Lincoln?
House on Lincoln Way. Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess in the summers there were dances on the Brookside Park tennis courts.
Tell me about that.
That was sponsored also by Parks and Recreation. And Lucille Rust, who was a real well-known woman in town, was the host of those dances. And Don Bradley from KASI.
It was it was like a DJ dance, spinning
Yes.
platters, records.
Yes, summer dance.
What about school dances during the year? School parties during the school year that you must have had.
I'll comment on those. I
Okay.
have to tell you an anecdote about the summer dance.
Oh, good, please.
I had just gotten my license. I was 16, and my dad didn't trust me with a car, so my first vehicle was a motor scooter, a Cushman motor scooter. And I went to the dance, and my sister Maggie, who's 2 years younger than I to the day, she budged in on my second birthday, was there with her buddies. And after the dance at 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock, everybody disperses. My sister Maggie and her 3 or 4 buddies head downtown. I'm on my Cushman motor scooter. I go down Brook Ridge to 6. I go left on 6 up over the viaduct. I'm down at Northwestern and 6th. And my sister and her buddies are in the crosswalk going across. And to be a smarty pants, I kind of buzzed them. And I was heading home, I guess. So I took a left on Northwestern. They went to the right. I'm up Northwestern about 2 blocks, and a siren goes off right behind me. The squad car couldn't have been more than 20 feet behind me. It scared me so much I almost fell off the scooter. And the police officer gets out. Car's got a cherry on top of it. No fancy lights like today. I'm over on the side by the curb. He said, "I saw you buzz those kids in the crosswalk. Don't you know that they have the right of way?" I said, "Well, I'm sorry. That was my sister and her friends." He says, "It doesn't matter." He says, "I'm writing you a ticket."
You're 16.
So I've had my license like 2 weeks. Now he writes me up a ticket for careless driving. So I have to go home and tell my dad, and probably lost the right to drive the scooter for a month or whatever. But John McKinney, a very well-known judge here in Ames, spent his whole career on the bench here in several positions, was not too long out of law school at that point, and had just become the municipal court judge. So a week or so later, I had to go appear before John McKinney, who, as I moved into my adulthood and came back to Ames after the military service, became a good friend of mine. So I would reminded John occasionally that I was one of his first clients, or first
Miscreants?
miscreants, yes. So I don't know, he slaps like a $50 fine on. I think I must have had to mow lawns for 3 weeks to get the money to pay the fine. So that's a memory from, the dance, and then an experience that happened to me with my first motor vehicle. So after that, I stepped up to a Cushman Eagle cycle. You had to straddle. It was a cycle, but with scooter wheels on it. I loved that vehicle. It had 2 gears on it. It was orange, which kind of fit in with Ames High's colors. I remember going to football practice one night, came out and couldn't get it started. Dad and the neighbor got a trailer and came down to the old roundhouse by the football stadium, locker room gym, old gym where my dad had played in the 30s. Hauled that scooter home in a trailer. The neighbor guy who helped get it going again drained the below the fuel tank. Found out that somebody had apparently peed in my gas tank. And I'm still looking for that guy. And at the reunion Saturday night, I'm going to ask him to step up and confess, and all will be forgotten. So anyway, that's, and that was in high school. So there's another remembrance from high school. You were asking about
school dances.
Our dances were always fun. Usually after football games in the fall are the ones that kind of stick out in my memory. We had some holiday. We had, and maybe you did as well. We're not that far apart in age. And there's a Christmas formal, as I recall. That was wonderful because it was in the Union. One that comes to mind was in the sunroom, and it was snowing that evening. And those beautiful windows in the sunroom, looking out onto Lincoln Way, and those pine trees that are out there. It was just a winter wonderland. And we had a band called the J Hall 4 that played in town a lot, and one of our classmates, Janet Wildman, was a vocalist, and wonderful vocalist.
Good memory.
So other dances were in the old high school gym. Our junior, senior proms were in the old gym because we didn't have a gym up at the new school. And that was a wonderful venue for a dance.
A lot of fun.
And
we can come back to that if there's another thought. But there's one serious question that I always want to ask, and if there was a worldwide event during your high school years, or something that happened to even younger that you remember about that really got Ames students thinking out of their own small community. In other words, visits from prominent people, or if there was a big world event that reflected on Ames, that kind of thing. Do you have any memories along that line? Shall we let the clock
Oh, it's 11.
Chime.
It's going to chime for a long time.
Yeah.
Well, you can edit that, and
Yeah.
I'll have to ponder. On that question, giving it some thought here, I don't recall anything, frankly. I remember in the mid-50s and beyond the Cold War and the concerns that everybody had about a nuclear attack.
Did you ever have drills like to go for nuclear shelters and that kind of thing?
No,
Okay.
we never did. I don't recall those at St. Cecilia. I don't recall any neighbors that had bomb shelters in their yard. The Cuban Missile Crisis, President Kennedy was killed in the fall of '63.
That's right.
Assassinated. I think it was perhaps that spring that we had the Cuban Missile Crisis.
But at any rate, you remember it in high school.
That would have been in the spring of our senior year. But of course, that came on suddenly and was over in a week's time or so. It was a real standoff. And then when President Kennedy was assassinated, we were all freshmen in college.
Right.
So I don't really remember anything noteworthy in the high school years that, caused much alarm, other than perhaps that Cuban Missile Crisis, which was constantly in the news coverage at that time.
Well, so this is my final question. When you talk to people outside of Ames about memories of Ames or incidents in Ames, or they just say, well, what was it like being an Ames school kid? What do you say to them?
Well, the first thing is that none of us really had an appreciation for it until we became adults, I think. As young people, it's kind of lost on you. Then you go on later into life, and you meet people from all over the world, all over the country, and you talk about their experiences. And gradually over time you get a perspective about what a special childhood and adolescence you had here in this community. It's a special place to this day, and I'm sure that when we have our reunion this weekend, there'll be lots of discussion about that. When I get the Ames High Alumni Association newsletters and read the letters from people of all eras, all generations, who write in about, thanking the association for the newsletter, and then saying what a special place Ames was to grow up. Unique, I think, because of the university and all that it brings to the community. A lot of diversity, although there was hardly any ethnic diversity at that time. Much more so now, I'm sure. We only had one African American in our class, Archie Green, who is coming back this weekend. She's suffering from MS. But in fact, I think you're going to be visiting with Archie and a couple of others in a group interview this week. But a lot of it was just the excitement of having Iowa State across town, athletic events, VEISHEA, of course. Another great memory from my childhood that I completely spaced off was taking my bike and going down to the Highway Commission garages in the week or two leading up to VEISHEA and helping the fraternity and sorority kids put tissue paper in their floats. How cool is that? And one of them, I think, may have been done by my Teak fraternity chapter, and which I think was Cinderella. Beautiful coach horses, and I remember working on the Cinderella float at the garage, and they were glad to have a bunch of snotty-nosed kids come around on their bicycles, because how tedious is that to stick colored tissue paper into the chicken wire. So I can't imagine, for me, my grandpa was a custodian. My dad was an upper-level manager, general manager of WWII television. We were one of the first, didn't mention this earlier, one of the first in our neighborhood in the 50s to have a television set because of that. Childhood memories of going out to WI and watching The Magic Window with Betty Lou McVeigh. Dad had my sister Maggie and me be in a commercial selling Gus Glazier wieners, and we got no royalties. We got a couple of free hot dogs, but I remember that. There's probably some old kinescopes of that somewhere. I remember going out to the old original studios and meeting Pancho, who was the sidekick of the Cisco Kid, right? And I sat on Pancho's knee. Oh, we're talking some things that are really special because of Iowa State and because of the gene pool that was infused in the high school and even the other grades, going clear back to parochial school by the children of faculty and staff members. So I think that's the primary thing about growing up in Ames is the university and all that it brought to the overall community. But the downtown community was special too. I mean, but it was more typical of other towns across the country. But we were blessed with a wonderful library, a Carnegie library, a great downtown area. Once the Dollar Days was always a big deal in the summer. Do you remember that? The downtown merchants, and they would close off Main Street, and at Main and Kellogg, I think, the main intersection, Main and Kellogg they had a big kind of a grandstand with entertainment, and Art Kettleson, who owned Car Hardware, with Jim Daffin, and the Kettleson boys were neighbors and friends of mine. Art was barbecuing had a barbecue grill out in front of the hardware store on the sidewalk, and for a couple of hours had couple of chickens on a spit. Well, at 12:30 or 1 o'clock, they had a drawing, and I won one of the chickens. So
Great story.
Art puts it in a bag, and I take it home. And so once again, I've gotten the cake earlier. Now I've got a chicken for the evening dinner. So, and Carpool fits into that whole fabric. That was a special place. That given its size, it was really an asset that not many communities had. And
It was just a very special town.
yeah, really special, but particularly unique because of the university.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your
You're
thoughts.
welcome.
Gary, it's been such a great trip down memory lane, and
Yeah.
such a nice way to chronicle you representing some of the thoughts of the class of 1963.
Yeah, for 25 years I've lived in Puget Sound in Olympia, Washington, which was a great place to raise the children after we left. We were in our 40s when we left, so we left many family and friends behind and moved out there. And it's been kind of a challenge for me emotionally over a quarter decade, because my heart's always been in Ames, but my body's been in Puget Sound. So I've gotten back here, quite often, and I hope your viewers have enjoyed some of my memories, some of which are particularly unique, like the Chariot accident or near accident. And I'm sure that many and most of them have, similar memories about those who, are natives of Ames. It's even something like the railroad tracks that come through here, Chicago and Northwestern, and now Santa Fe.
Union Pacific,
Union
I think.
Pacific.
I don't want to say the wrong thing, but I think I'm pretty close to that.
So much of life was affected by. Now it's more efficient, I think, as far as they've got. Well, we had the underpass, but I remember a terrible train collision behind the Main Street area in the 50s. My dad got a call, and we came down and looked, and I think a couple people were killed. I think it was 2 freight trains. But I remember the smoldering accident, wreckage right behind Eschbach music. So that was kind of another special thing about Ames, because right after 8th grade I got on a train and went to Chicago. It's my first time out of town to see a classmate from St. Cecilia who had just moved there. So I went by myself to Chicago. Wow, that was a big deal.
Well, I'm not surprised, since you were Red Rover.
And I still am.
And you still.
I'm thinking about getting a motorhome, and I'm going to put on the door, Red Rover. Well, thank you, Teresa.
Thank you, Gary.
I've enjoyed it.